everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss our favorite Resident Evil games. So of course, continuing the celebration of Resident Evil's 30th anniversary leading into Resident Evil 9, going through the list. If you haven't seen the last couple episodes, it's all Resident Evil this month. Admittedly, it's probably going to be Resident Evil for like a month and a half because I'm probably going to have so many of these that I don't, I'll probably still have a couple in March as well. But continuing on with the celebration of all things Resident Evil, figured it was time. We talked about Leon in the last episode, most people's favorite character. He's the poster boy, and I figured why not go from favorite characters, or kind of the favorite character for most people, to just favorite games. So of course, the franchise is 30 years old. There's tons of games to pick as your favorite game and least favorite game, all that good stuff. So we're just gonna kind of jump around. I am gonna start, of course, with my actual favorite Resident Evil game, which is the original Resident Evil 3. So RE3 Nemesis is my favorite Resident Evil game out of everything we've had. RE3 is my number one. Played it as a kid, absolutely loved it, and I did play them in order. So like a lot of people mention, like they started with 2 and then played 1 and then played 3 and stuff. Like I went 1, 2, and 3 in order, so I have like the genuine progression of those games coming out. So for me, it wasn't like, oh, it was my first one, and people always see it as like a bit lesser than the remake for sure. That's its own thing, of course, but it's always kind of seen as slightly lesser than. A lot of people kind of crap on it, if I'm being totally honest. Like, maybe not as much as they crap on like Resident Evil 0 or anything, but I feel like when it comes to the original 3, people crap on 3 like a lot. So it's always been my personal favorite, and that was, like I said, being a kid who did play through Resident Evil 1 a bunch of times and also Resident Evil 2, and then eventually I got 3 and I was like, no, I actually like this one the most. And I think it was Nemesis. I think the element of Nemesis, especially because, that's one of the big things about the game where, you watch people talk about it today, it's like, it's not as random as you think. But when you first play the game, it's random as F. Like, you have no idea what's going to happen. And you can still kind of play around with it and make it a bit more randomized, because if you choose to fight sometimes and not other times, then, obviously that changes things up a bit. You fight him in front of the RPD, he doesn't bust through the window with the rocket launcher, like that sort of stuff. So it's interesting to go through that game and like have that experience where things just change up slightly as you play through the game. And every time you do it, it's also automatically randomized where some things are slightly different. And I always thought that was cool. It was something I didn't even realize as a kid playing the game when I was younger, is that not weapons, but like, I think it was smaller items. I don't think it was the key items, but items were randomized. So I always thought it was just like, I'm just playing through the game. I'm just like, it doesn't really matter if the items are randomized. There's so many different options for the 4 times, I think, that you get to choose with Nemesis. So you can do it at the RPD, you can do it in the newspaper office, you can do it at the clock tower, and then at the bridge in the dead factory. I think those are like the 4 times. And 5 if you want to count like the very ending where it's like you either use the Magnum or you just kind of leave it to be blown up when he's like the crazy blob form, which is crazy. Like, you have to use the Magnum, right? Like, you want stars, I'll give you stars. That's one of the greatest lines in all of Resident Evil, is you want stars, I'll give you stars. Like 100%, one of the best lines. Once again, we don't really have to dive into the RE3 remake and how they did that, where, I was like a lot of people, they did that junk and it was like, I'm getting chased. I couldn't even finish the line. She got socked in the back of the head when I was doing it. And I've seen a bunch of people say that, where it was like, you either couldn't hear it because you're running, or right as it starts, you're like, oh crap, and then he catches up with you too fast and he punches you in the back of the head. I was like, I didn't even get the whole effing line when I first played the game. So, it is what it is when it comes to the remake. I've done a whole video on that and just how disappointing that was for me. So if you guys want to look into that, you definitely can. But RE3 is definitely my favorite Resident Evil. I've always loved it. I had Mercenaries, like OG version of Mercenaries, always one of the best. I wish that we could get that back. If they would just, even if they called it something else. Admittedly, we always called it Mercenaries mode, but it is called Operation Jackal. Like, they could just bring that back as its own mode and just be like, hey, go from point A to point B, and then just do something. Like, they could do that in most of the games, honestly. Oddly enough, and I don't remember what episode I mentioned this in, they couldn't have actually done it in the remake because there was nowhere to go. Like, the only actual area where you can run from point A to point B is, like, obviously it was the city portion, but there's nowhere to go. Like, it's such a small, tiny map, there's nothing you could do. Like, maybe if they did like the hospital from point A to point B, where it was like you leave from the lab all the way to like the main floor of the hospital or something like that, you could do. Or maybe the RPD, because it's a little bit bigger, although that would be smaller than the hospital too. But that's really it. You couldn't even actually do it utilizing the city itself from, the remake of the game. But I always thought, like, man, it would be cool if they brought back like the OG version of the Mercenaries mode. So I doubt that's ever gonna really happen. But I always love that. It's always been fun. You run through and do the best that you can, and try to just have fun with it and save as many people as you can. And then sometimes you're like, you know what? I can't save you. I was never good at going to the restaurant. Like, I always felt like it took me too long. Like, I wasn't good enough to be like, let me run here, let me run into the restaurant, run into the bottom, save. I can't remember if it was Brad. I think it was Brad that was in the restaurant, and then it was like a random woman who may or may not have been the model of like the pharmacy woman in the commercial. That might have been who that was if you run to the gas station. I think that's who that probably was. But I could always get like one person, maybe two people, but I was like, man, I could never really get everybody. And also there's that one room that you could go into that you could only do in Mercenaries mode. But I swear in the strategy guide when I was a kid, it always said if you jumped out of the window in the newspaper area, you could open that door in the main campaign. Because you can do it in Mercenaries and you go in and it's just a long hallway and then there's like somebody at the very end of it. But in the main campaign, you could never open that door. But they said that you could if you did like a specific thing. And it was supposed to just be you jump out the window at the newspaper office. That's the one time in the whole game you're supposed to be able to open that door. And I always remember reading that and I'm like, it's set to jump out the window. Why did, or not jump out the window, but just run in general from the newspaper office. And it just never effing worked. And I was like, I don't understand. But that's what the strategy guy said. At least that's what I remember. Because I remember trying to do that a million times over. Because I'm like, it says you can do it in the main campaign, but I can never pull it off. So I don't know if that's true or if I'm just, you make up memories and that was totally wrong. But that's how I always remembered it. It was trying to get into that room as much as I could. And of course, if you don't remember RE3 as well as I do, then I understand that this makes no sense because you don't know what room I'm talking about. But there's like one door that's just permanently locked in the main campaign. But you can go in there in Mercenaries mode. But always love that. Always loved the unlockables, as a kid. And I mentioned this, now I remember where I told these stories recently. It was just going through, talking about Resident Evil, so I was referencing 3, of course. But getting all the weapons and stuff, unlocking the Gatling gun, getting the rocket launcher, very cool. Getting the ammo case was awesome. And then as an adult is really when I got to go through and play the game on hard mode. I'll tell you, if you go back to the full Resident Evil 3 thing, you'll hear the crazy story of how I no longer have my original Resident Evil 3. Or at least the running theory on why I no longer have my original Resident Evil 3. So you guys can check that episode out for that one. But going through and getting all that stuff when I finally bought the game on PS3 was super fun. And like actually fighting Nemesis every single time and getting the special handgun and then getting the special shotgun was super cool. I used the mine thrower. I never used that as a kid, even though I got it. You get that. You get all the weapons outside of obviously the ones you unlock when you fight them, but you technically get the mine thrower. I don't think I ever used that as a kid, and I was messing around with it, and I was like, oh, RE3 has a mine thrower just like RE4 does, and it was such an interesting experience because I remember using it during like the big clock tower fight, which I always considered to be like the hardest fight in the whole game. I remember using it there, and that's when I realized that they had like a thing where if you shot multiple mines before they exploded, if you switch weapons, it would actually stop you and say like, hey, if you switch weapons, the mines are gonna delete, basically, like you will not get this ammo back. And I remember thinking like, wow, I never knew that was a thing. Like it actually tells you like, hey, processing power and all that stuff. This ain't modern technology. If you don't have that weapon out, the ammo for that weapon is gonna disappear. I don't care if you shot it somewhere, it's gonna disappear. And I was like, well, I gotta, I gotta switch because he was destroying me. I hated the mine thrower. Like I thought it was gonna be cool, and I was like, no, the mine thrower takes like a million years to explode. It's like on a timer. I assumed it was like proximity, kind of like, somewhat like RE4, but it's on a timer, much like RE4, and it's on a much longer timer. I felt like it took an eternity for those mines to blow up. I was like, I hate the mine thrower in RE3, personally speaking. I've always just been like, I don't like this weapon. Like it took way too long. If you're fighting the crowds, it's early stuff, you're doing New Game Plus, definitely it can work. On regular enemies, you probably got a chance. But with Nemesis running around, I was like, this is not working. And of course, even when I'm aiming at him, I'm shooting off screen and then I run around, it's like, oh, it hit the fountain. So it's like sticking inside of a fountain. I have to like wait for him to hopefully walk next to it if it blows up. So I was like, yeah, the mine thrower was not for me. Like I said, regular enemies, you're good to go, but it took a long time for those things to blow up. It wasn't even proximity. Like I said, it was like straight up timer, maybe a combination, but I think it was like just a timer from what I recall. So that was unfortunate, but I was like, yeah, I'm getting beat up here. But I liked all the, unlocking all the weapons and getting all the costumes and finally being able to have, like, I always wanted the disco costume. When I was a kid, I would see it in the strategy guide and I was always like, man, I want the disco costume so effing bad. Which, if I recall from the strategy guide, they said the disco costume was based off of the X-Files, like Gillian Andrews, like her having like the crazy collar, the pop collar. Well, it wasn't a pop collar, but she would always have like the wide collars on her outfits. And that's what I remember reading. Once again, that could just be a made-up memory in my head, but I'm pretty sure the disco costume was somewhat inspired by the X-Files. Which even as a kid, I thought that was weird because I was like, she doesn't wear this costume, but it was like, I guess just the collar. Because even when I read that, I remember thinking, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But, that's what I'm just saying. Old memory, so if you get the strategy guide or you have it, feel free to correct me. I would love to know if I was right or wrong on that. But always loved RE3. Like I said, definitely my favorite, which is why, of course, the RE3 remake hurts my soul every single time I think about it. But I love me some RE3 no matter what. Other favorite Resident Evil games. RE1 remake. I consider it to be personally the best Resident Evil, where it's like, hey, if you're going quintessential Resident Evil, of course, even today, it might be a little hard to get people to play that one just because of I think the camera angles more than anything else, because at this point you could do like the modern controls, which makes the game super easy. But if you wanted to introduce someone to Resident Evil, you could still do it with the remake. If not, of course, you would go with the remake of either 2 or 3. But I love the RE1 remake. I remember getting that and being extremely happy. Like I got it late, I got it used. Once again, go back to the let's discuss Resident Evil as a whole episode. You'll get like all the full-on stories from that. But love the RE1 remake, played it a bunch of times. Never played like the prototype mode. Like I by the time I got to the point of like I beat it a few times, I was kind of moving on to other games, and I've always wanted to go back. And I have it on, I guess, the PS4 version, the collection for 0 and 1. And I always wanted to go back, like, just to beat the prototype mode and beat, like, the final hard difficulty and stuff. I always wanted to do that just for the remake, just because I love the game. So at some point, I probably will do that, but that'll be, I got such a backlog. Who knows when that'll ever actually happen? But I've always wanted. That's like one of the few games where I'm like, I want to go back and like fully do everything, just because I consider like the best Resident Evil. I want to do everything in the game like myself, not just see it. So at some point in the future, I will be doing that. But love me some Resident Evil 1 remake. Of course, classic RE1 is definitely a good game. RE2, definitely a phenomenal game. Played the crap out of that as well. But when it came to the first 3, Resident Evil 3 was always, like, it instantly was like, this is my number 1. I love Resident Evil 3 the most. And then one of my other favorites, which I'm hoping it is the next remake, Code Veronica. That has a very special place in my heart. I feel like it's super underrated amongst the entire franchise. Like, 0 gets more recognition for being crapped on, I feel, than Code Veronica gets for even being a good game. Unless we're referencing Steve, in which case, people will make fun of that. But I love Code Veronica. I always really enjoyed that game. It was, for me, it was the PS2 Resident Evil game until RE4 came along, which was admittedly years later. Like, I was playing Code Veronica, that was for quite a while before RE4 officially came out. But I always loved Code Veronica. It has my favorite save room theme. I cannot help but always love the only thing that I'm gonna hate when they remake that game is the fact that they're gonna have a different voice actor for Alfred, because that weird Velociraptor laugh he used to have was one of my favorite things. Like, even in Dark Side Chronicles, I was like, it's not up to snuff. Like, it has to be the Velociraptor laugh. Like, that's like, if it's not that, it's not Code Veronica. Like, it just, like, something about that was so dumb. And I was like, what is this laugh? Like, it's just one of the best weird Resident Evil decisions where they're like, yeah, that's a good laugh. It's like, he sounds like a Velociraptor. And I love it. It's one of the most memorable things that I can think of. And I feel like so few people have like really tapped into Code Veronica that it's just never brought up. But I'm like, that's a ridiculous laugh. That is a ridiculous laugh. And we never talk about it. It's one of those things where it's like, we kind of let go of like the weird dialogue and stuff, but I'm like, no, it's still there. It's still there in Code Veronica. It's got its moments. Once again, Steve will always be the one to reference it when we go like, man, how the dialogue used to be, and it'd be like 1, 2, and 3, and it got better and better, and then we'll kind of make fun of Steve, mostly for his voice more than really how he would do the dialogue, because he would act it well. It was just like, he sounded like his voice was just so nasally. But Alfred and that laugh was just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So love me some Code Veronica. I always enjoyed it. Not much in the way of unlockables. I always thought that with RE2, but that's just because I was a kid and didn't know that you could unlock all sorts of things in that game. But Code Veronica was like, yeah, you beat the game, and here you go. You get like a cool battle mode. Has a first-person view. First time, if I'm not mistaken, that's technically the first time we got to play as Wesker, because he was one of the characters you could pick in that battle mode as well. I think it was Claire, Chris, Steve, and Wesker was the fourth character. So I think that's the first time he was ever a playable character. And I think he was also a lot like Nikolai in Mercenaries mode, where he basically just had like health and a knife, and that was kind of like the thing. But that was always interesting. And also the fact that you could play in first person. And I always remember thinking, why didn't they make that an unlockable for Code Veronica, where like you beat the game and then it's like now you can play the whole thing in first person, because they made a whole mode where you just pick if you want third or first person. And I was like, that's so weird they didn't make that like an option, you know, at least as an unlockable option for the game. And it's like, surprise, you know, first person view. So I always thought that was kind of weird, because I definitely would have replayed the game again if I could have like changed it to first person. That would have been super weird to play. But if you want to do that, I guess you could kind of play Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica, which I played in the arcade. Once again, go back to the Resident Evil thing. There's not much to it. I played that in the arcade. I have a very soft spot for Survivor 2 because I saw it in the wild. So unlike most people who played it and it's a crappy arcade game, I actually played it as an arcade game in the arcade. So it felt a lot different. It was, you know, I have a good experience with that, and it's like a nice little rare touchstone of like Resident Evil time that I had in my life, where it's like most people probably didn't get to experience that game in the actual arcade, so you're kind of just stuck with, you know, internet ports, we'll call them. And then that's pretty much it. And it's like, yeah, I could see why people like Survivor 1 more, because Survivor 1 has a real story. Survivor 2 is just like an arcade version of Code Veronica. Plus they throw in Nemesis, which is interesting. But soft spot in my heart, had to throw that one in there, even though I just talked about it in the other episode. But gotta throw that in there. If I mention Code Veronica, I have to mention the fact that I did play Survivor 2 in the actual arcade. And I personally loved it because it was like a holy crap experience. Like Resident Evil in the arcade is like one of the, that was just like insane. It was like my life changed that day. So it was really crazy. But love me some Code Veronica. I really do hope that it's the remake for multiple reasons. I think it would give a greater appreciation for the game, because I feel like it's really underappreciated. You know, within the community, it's that whole thing of like, it was supposed to be 3 and all that. Like, it wasn't actually supposed to be 3. And there's just a whole lot of back and forth around that and the timing and all that. But it is like one of the most important non-numbered games. It might be the most important, actually, non-numbered game in like the entire franchise. And then Revelations 2, I would say might be number 2. You know, if they follow up on Revelations 2, that will officially be the most important non-numbered title, not counting it being obviously Revelations 2, but like mainline number. Until they officially follow that up, Code Veronica is like the most important non-numbered Resident Evil game that we have out there. I would say more so than Outbreak, but I guess at the same time, you know, Outbreak 1 and 2 are kind of, you know, they're going to be bumped up quite a bit with RE9 coming out. But even then, it's only for one character. So, you know, you got like tons of other characters. If this has, you know, we'll see with RE9, I doubt it's going to happen. But if like everybody started showing up from Outbreak and it was like, yeah, here's what this person did and that person did and here's what everybody did, then it's like, okay, you just threw like a dozen people into the franchise and gave them all updates. You might end up being like the most important game now. Like Outbreak File 1 and 2 might become like the most important non-numbered titles if they start throwing out lore for like a dozen characters. I doubt that's gonna happen, so I'm gonna stick with it's the most important right now, because of course it's Claire, Chris, and then the you know, the Wesker stuff going on. So I hope that does get the remake. I hope that's the announcement at some point during this 30th anniversary year. And in general, I just want that one because I love that game. I'd rather have Code Veronica than a remake of 5, personally. I would love to see them fully remake Code Veronica, because the game was always scary. That was another thing. I always thought Code Veronica was actually a really good, scary game. I remember the first encounter with the dogs was super cool, because they like showed the dogs drag a body underneath, and you're kind of just waiting for them to pop out. Like, well, clearly they're underneath, because you would be walking, for anyone who hasn't played Code Veronica, there's this great moment where they introduce the dogs, and you see them pull a body underneath this building. So the building is like built up on, basically like on stilts. So it's got like grates and stuff, but the grates are busted. So it's just open space underneath. It's like having a house that has like the dirt basement, basically, where they built like a full layer, and then underneath that is where like the actual ground is. It's like that. And so it's like they pull a body underneath and you're like, uh-oh, dogs. and you just see like these little rectangles along the bottom of this building, and you're like, they're gonna come out at some point. And I will say, it may not be exactly the same as them busting through a window, but it was pretty close, because they throw a couple at you at the same time, and it's like, uh-oh. Like, and it's pretty rough. So I always enjoyed Code Veronica for like the scares it gave. It's the only game that does like the crazy heartbeat thing. That was amazing. I remember the first time I experienced that, I was like, this is terrifying. When you first go up the stairs in the beginning of the game, terrifying. And they would just have random moments where they're like, all right, we're just gonna make Claire be really scared and slow down, and then we'll just add a heartbeat. And I'm like, this is genius. Like, they honestly, it's the only game that did that. And of course, after that, you know, it was basically 4 was the next Resident Evil game. But it was like, man, if we, that was something that should have been brought back. Like, that's something they probably should have thrown into the collection for like remake 1 and 0, just to be like, hey, remember that from Code Veronica? Let's just slap it on here. Like, just because. I love that feature. It's one of the best things that that game ever did, was make the scariest load screens they've ever had in the franchise, as far as I'm concerned. You know, obviously the RE2 jump scare when you go to the back of the RPD, that's a great one, but the random moments where Claire would just slowly walk up the stairs or like slowly open a door and you just hear her heartbeat, amazing, absolutely amazing work. And I was like, man, it sucks that that's the only game that does that. That's another reason it's super underrated. No one, you know, so many people didn't play it. It's like, that's a great mechanic. Like, it happens maybe like 3 or 4 times throughout the game, if I can recall correctly. It's been, of course, it's been forever since I played it, but it doesn't happen very often. But the couple of times it does, it's like, oh, I forgot that was even a thing. And I was, you know, even before you know it, you're just like, all right, let's go up the stairs. And then it's like, her heart is beating and she's going up super slow. I'm like, oh, this is freaking me out. Like, this is really good. So definitely underrated Resident Evil game in my personal opinion. I always thought it was super cool. They have weird stuff like at the end of the game when you fight Nosferatu, where they have multiple ways you can kill the enemy. Like, you can literally get different animation kills based on if you use a gun, like handgun, sniper rifle, and the knife, I think are the 3 different animation kills. That's a crazy thing to add in. Like, why would they, like, it's so random for them to have put that type of effort in, but they did. Granted, you know, if we're gonna talk Nosferatu in Antarctica, the moths are annoying. We can definitely talk about that. That is one thing that was really dumb in that game. And of course, the fire extinguisher issue, I don't think I ever ran into that. Even when I first played the game, I don't think I ever had that problem, but it is something that can potentially happen. So I never experienced that myself. And even now, I always kind of forget what the exact answer is to do that. But I've always thought like, oh, you know, no problem for me personally. But I can totally understand, you know, if something soft locks you out of playing the effing game, then hey, I totally understand that being an issue. Also, I do have to mention that there is an experience that I had with Code Veronica that made me stop playing for like 9 straight months. And that's the glass orb thing. If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's fine. There's an orb that you have to break because it has a card in it. And because of the power of the PlayStation 2, you literally had to be like pixel perfect. Because I'm like, I'm not an idiot. At this point, I've suffered enough with puzzles I couldn't figure out from RE3 or, you know, water puzzle, RE1, that freaking clock puzzle. But I'm like, I know that all I have to do is get this orb, and there's this big thing that falls down if you walk underneath it. I think I put the orb right here. I did that like 15 times, and it was like, yeah, you can't use this here. And I stopped playing the game for like 9 months because I was like, I do not understand what to do. And one day I just went back to play it, went to the spot, and apparently I was in the pixel perfect position. I hit the button and it was like, here you go. And I just dropped the orb. I was like, what the F? So it was definitely 100% just a mechanical thing where I had to be in the perfect position to put that orb down. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I walked around, I probably spent like an hour, if not more. Once that didn't work so many times, I was like, is there something I'm missing? Where do I go? I had no idea what to do. And I knew the answer. The whole time I was right on what the answer was. It just was not working because I didn't take like an extra step forward or turn slightly to the left or right. I was not in the pixel perfect position. That, like, legit, I stopped playing the game for like 9 months because I was like, I literally don't know what to do. And of course this was, you know, before the internet where it's like, hey, just do this thing. So that, you know, that was an issue with that. But still love me some Code Veronica. I do hope that's the remake. Outside of Code Veronica, I'm gonna mention one more that I really, really love. I like RE4, but the RE4 remake I think is better. RE4 remake might be my number 3 Resident Evil game. I think it goes 3, RE1, and then it'll be RE4. And then after that would be RE2 as well. As much as I love RE2, it is that weird blend of like the action plus the horror, because I still think RE4 has great scary moments. And I think that's why I like it more than the original. It's even scarier than the original 4. That's why I would pick that over Remake 2, even though that was scary. it's the same thing. Once you go through, I mean, let's be honest, all Resident Evils are like this. Horror the first time, the second time, you're trapped in here with me. That's just how we do it. That's the way it goes. And it's great. That's one of the best things about the whole franchise. You can run through, you're scared, you get jump scared, all that good stuff. Second time you run through, you'll probably still get scared by a few things here and there. It depends on, what changes or what you try to do, or maybe, up the difficulty and you're like, ooh, I thought I was gonna kill you with that shot. Things change around. But for 4, if I'm already going through the element of like, I'm scared the first time, but I'm not gonna be as scared the second time, might as well be a bit more action-packed. And that, I'm telling you guys, the encounter with the knife is one of the greatest mechanics they've ever added to Resident Evil. And I'm so happy that they brought it back with the axe. I was like, every Resident Evil game should have that forever at this point. Like, every single Resident Evil game should have like a deflection. Even if you can't do, you're not suplexing anybody after you do it, just the deflection in general, some character in the game, like, because I think that's how it's gonna work with 9. And I thought of this too. I was like, maybe not everybody can do it, but at least have it in every game. And I think that's how we're gonna get it, where obviously Leon's the one deflecting stuff, picking up chainsaws, flipping and kicking. I haven't seen a suplex, but if we get like an insanely bloody suplex in this one, I'll be happy with that too. And then of course, Grace is gonna be much calmer. She'll have like the defense weapons from RE2, but she won't exactly be like deflecting, knife hits or axes and stuff like that. So I think that parry mechanic needs to be in literally every Resident Evil, even if it's not every single character. Whoever it makes sense to have it, just give that to them. At least it's in the game somewhere. It would be great to have it all the way through, but hey, it is what it is. If it has to lean more horror so we don't have that, that's fine by me. But that parry mechanic is amazing. Also, I mentioned this at some point in like one of the more recent videos, PSVR 2, RE4 is one of the greatest experiences of my life. And you can watch that, by the way. You can watch me play through RE4 the first time, the DLC, and then in VR for the first time as well. So if you guys want to check all of that out, you can literally watch me play every Resident Evil starting from 7 all the way up. I recorded all of those. And I did do 0 and the remake of 1. I think I recorded both of those. I know I did 0 because I did like the silly Wesker mode where I was just running around with him. So I know I did that one, but I'm pretty sure I also did RE1 as well. But most of the Resident Evil games that are out, you can watch me do a recording of those because I had a blast with them. Love me some Resident Evil, of course. But I would love to know, what are your favorite Resident Evil games? You don't have to give them all in order. If you have them all in order, I would love to read them. I would love to know everyone's list and like where everything lands for you guys. I would love to see if Survivor beats like any other Survivor, for some people, might beat Resident Evil 6. I think that's crazy. I like Resident Evil 6. I like Resident Evil 6 more than I like Resident Evil 5. I said that like 2 videos ago, but I'm gonna say it every chance I get. I don't like RE5. I don't like it. I'd have to go back to it, but I was like, meh. I played through it twice. Don't hate it, but I'm not like, oh, I love this. I would much rather play RE6 than RE5. I'd at least have fun playing it. Like RE5, I'm just like, I don't even really like the story that much. Like the end of the game, phenomenal. You're fighting Wesker, you get Jill back, all that stuff, great. The DLC is also amazing, but main campaign is like, That's just how I feel about it. But we'd love to know your thoughts, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.